Hello, I'm doing this video for the biophilic alternative and also my shadow buyer page because I feel like this kind of needs to be known, and it needs to be a thing that's discussed about. And quite often, in older forms of folk magic, we tend to just look up history, but we never actually tend to look where that part of history is from, what area it's from. And then if we think of areas within Britain that are highly influenced by folk magic and witchcraft, we automatically 9 times out of 10 will think Cornwall. But it's not just Cornwall. Now, of course, Cornwall is steeped in folklore, steeped in magic and folk magic, and we know this. Have a look at Boscastle. Just have a look at the way that all the old festivals and seasons that they celebrate as well, all the traditions and folklore. You have to remember a lot of folk witchcraft tales, folklore, a lot of them come from people working agriculturally, so it would be farmers that would report these folklores. These folklores that would basically report and have these stories and spread this folklore. A lot of folklore is word of mouth, orally, as people never had the internet back then. So, as I was saying, we always think about Cornwall as a place of high in folk magic and witchcraft, and it is. But it's not just Cornwall. There are other areas of Britain that are steeped in folklore. For instance, the Orkney Islands, the Orkney witch's charm, when somebody would lay down between land, sky, and sea, and basically recite this charm and sing this charm, and then have 7 stones around them. And as each throw, they would say, "Take me," with each throw, and that was a way in which somebody would become a witch. To right down to East Anglia, to the idea of the toad bone rite, the way in which somebody would become a witch, but would also become a toadsman or a horseman or a toad witch, and would have the ability to jade animals, and it was called jaded or jading, to control animals, to control people. Well, necessarily control, but highly influence people and animals. And some would say that you would also become a horse whisperer by that right. Now, it's not, it's Essex as well. A lot of people disregard Essex as a place for witchcraft and folk magic. And I've actually heard this a couple of times, that there is actually apparently more folk magic in Essex than there is Cornwall and the West Country. And that Essex is a very much ignored place for folk magic and witchcraft. And the reason of that is that many people haven't actually done much writing on it yet, and many people haven't actually, it's not really online. But have a look into Essex, have a look into James Cunning Mural, who was a cunning folk there, that would have his miraculous witch bottles, once again, that he would put into a fire that would explode, and that he would unbewitch somebody. George Pickingale as well, who, had his, I think it was 9 white mice familiars that he had, that, he would sit down and the mice would do the work for him all day in the field. Again, it comes down to the agricultural thing, that farming community. Farmers are very much linked to witches throughout history and folklore, and it is because farmers tend to be the ones that used to speak oral folklore the most out of any other profession throughout history. Now, it's not just, there's so many different areas. Wales, we hear of witchcraft and tales of the fae folk in Wales. And not just that, you've got Scotland. I mean, I don't even know where to begin in Scotland. Scotland has a lot of folk witchcraft and magic to it, to the tales of Isabel Gowdy, to the confessions of Agnes Sampson, to the cunning folk and wise women and wise men that used to be there. There's to the Orkney Islands. There's a lot of witch folklore in Scotland, and you have to remember that the and I mean this with all due respect, the Sayax Wicca that we have now by Buckland is very different from the folklore and folk magic of Scotland, and that distinction has to be made. The folklore and folk witchcraft of Scotland is very different from Sayax Wicca. Now, it's not to say that Sayax Wicca is bad or it's crap or nothing like that, and I'm not saying that at all, but what I am saying is that distinction has to be made. The Midlands, Birmingham. My best friends, a couple of my best friends live in Birmingham, and you know what? Birmingham, the Midlands, near that area, is steeped in paganism, witchcraft, and folklore. Absolutely rich in folklore. There's the idea of the Dudley Devil, the cunning man from Dudley. In fact, they in that area they even have their own beer, the Dudley Devil's beer, I think, or something like that. Actually, here we have Pendle Witch beer. So you have to remember different areas, different regions within Britain will have different traditions attached to them throughout folklore and oral tradition. Not just, Britain, Ireland as well, Southern Ireland. Ireland has a rich folklore of witchcraft and paganism attached to it. The Ogham or the Ogham, Ireland, but among many other customs and traditions. Now, I could sit here and explain all the different traditions and customs and stuff like that. What I will do, though, is I will explain a little bit of East Anglian witchcraft, and then I'll explain at the end why I've done this video. Now, East Anglian witchcraft, a lot of East Anglian witches were said to have their familiars underneath their armpits, and Old Horny, the idea of the devil or the horned one, would also be called Old Harry, and fairies would be called Ferishes. And once again, as I said in my last video, a way to curse somebody would be to nail with an iron nail a toad bone over their door to show that they had been tudded, they had been overlooked by the witch. But yeah, a good thing, the reason why I'm explaining, this video is quite scattered, I'm sorry, I'm just like verbal diarrhea at the moment. The reason why I'm doing this video is because I was born in Essex. I grew up in Barking and Dagenham until I was 18. Now, and it turns out, I had no idea, that Dagenham is very much had a supposed witch that was said to live there and work there. Now, whether or not we know that she was a cunning folk or anything like that, we don't know. We're not sure. However, before she did die, before she was hung, which is quite sad, she did scream out and repent and ask that God repented all her sins. It's just quite upsetting to know that all the horrible stuff that happened back then, whether or not people were practicing something, or 9 times out of 10, whether or not they weren't, the people that they caught. But anyway, whether or not they were cunning folk, whether or not they weren't. But anyway, her name was called Joan Opney, and she was said to have toad and mole familiars that would do work for her, and that sometimes were giving her a bit of a rough time because she had too many familiars. That was one of her things. There was also reports of a witch in... Right. There was Joan Prentice, Joan Opney, and Joan Cunny. Now, Cunny is quite interesting. Now, a lot of people by their second names were the profession. So either Joan Cunny might have been a prostitute, the word cunny, which is what the word see you next Tuesday originates from, or could have been a cunning woman. Okay, we don't know. Or maybe not both of those. We don't know, really. I'll try and research and find out and get back to you guys on that one. One come from Sisted, one come from Hedningham, and the other came from Dagenham. Joan Upney came from Dagenham. Now, if anybody's ever been to Dagenham now, it's not particularly a nice place. It's not a nice place at all. In fact, Dagenham is quite rough. And it's quite a dangerous place, past 10 at night, really. People don't really go out much. Unless they do, you're going to get mugged or stabbed. But anyway, Dagenham is actually halfway between East London and Essex, and actually there are loads of people in Dagenham are like, it's Essex, it's East London, it's East London, it's Essex. It's a shithole. There we go. I've won that. I've solved that argument. And it's quite sad because Dagenham did used to be a very, very rural area, way back before I was born, way back when. We have an old manor house there as well, Eastbury Manor House. But it turns out that Dagenham had a witch trial there. And all three witches, all three Joans, were tried at Chelmsford. And within Essex witchcraft, a lot of familiars tend to either be, and it's quite interesting, it's only throughout Essex, not only throughout Essex, but it's most common in Essex. A lot of the witches' familiars tend to be moles, a polecat or a ferret, or a toad. They tend to be quite common. For some reason, only within Essex, just those three. Now, whether or not that species of animal was most common back then in Essex, I do know where my dad lives, there is polecats, and he does get polecats, which are sort of like ferrets. Which reminds me of something, actually. Sorry, completely unrelated. But yeah, it's have a look into your folk tradition. Have a look into the area that you're in. See if there was a witch trial there, and then have a look at some of the confessions or testimonies. Have a look if anything's relevant. So, for instance, I could say that throughout my findings, what I found within Essex-style witchcraft is that the mole, the ferret, or the polecat, or the toad seems to be the prevalent familiars, the working familiars of the Essex current, so to speak, of witchcraft, or what we know through folklore and history. Now, that doesn't mean to say that what you will be practicing will be bang on from what they use, because it won't be. A lot of the times, people will put a spin on things and work it to how they want to work it, which is fine, which is good. There are certain things. So, for instance, if one was to go through with the toad bone rite, you would definitely be doing that according to folklore, and you went by it step by step. You would be doing what witches of way back when done. The wording you would use probably would be different, but it's just interesting for me from a personal evaluation. Now, I live in Lancashire. I live in Salford Keys, very posh. But I live in Lancashire, and basically every Good Friday I will recite the Good Friday charm, and I do it to unbewitch myself, to rid myself of any overlooks that people may have done, but also to bond with the spirit of land, to bond with the spirit of Lancashire and the Lancashire witch current that will be within the land, and to honour the Pendle witches. Now, it's a great belief to me that the certain style of witchcraft will certain traditions and folklore traditions that we have from different regions and different areas is an amplification, is basically the spirit of place, the spirits of the land amplifying within different practices. It is a great belief to me that is the case. We know that the Pendle witches a lot of the times were said to use clay figures, clay puppets, and burn them, and so the clay would crumble. That was a thing. But yeah, it's interesting. Have a look into your area. Have a look if you live in Britain. If you're outside of Britain, America, I know there's a lot of folklore surrounding some of your witchcraft. Australia, I don't know. I'll be honest. It's quite embarrassing, but I don't know if there was any anything there witchy, sorry. But yeah, and it's not to say that if you're not in these areas, you can't practice these different regional traditions of witchcraft. And ultimately, say Essex witchcraft would be just witchcraft practiced in Essex, or that was practiced in Essex, really. It is all ultimately witchcraft, but different regions have different folklores and different variations of them of witchcraft. So have a look. If you're in Scotland, definitely have a look, because there will be all of the witch lore there, which is very, very cool. But yeah, I like to think it almost as different families. It's like having different families of different, different ways of doing things, which is very, very cool. And it gives you some variety on your practice as well. So yes, over and out. Peace, and I hope you all enjoyed this video.